Welcome back to the Algebra channel. This is Tags the Solver. Remember that we are solving these for the weakest student in your mathematics class. For today, our problem is to solve the quadratic equation here, x squared plus 2x minus 8 equals 0, specifically using the quadratic formula. So you must use the quadratic formula as part of the condition of solving this problem. Now, before I proceed, I would like to show you a video on the tips and tricks on how to solve quadratic equations using the quadratic formula. It's a prepared video, and if you have seen that video already, you may skip that portion and then proceed towards the parts where we start solving this particular problem. Alright, please wait for the video coming up right now. Hi, I'm Tags the Solver. If you are the weakest student in your maths class, you've come to the right place. Don't worry, I'm here to help you. In the course of creating videos involving the quadratic formula, I realized I needed to summarize the attack strategy in solving the quadratic equation, because I had to repeat myself in every problem. So I created this video on the notes and tips and the common possible sources of mistakes whenever we use the quadratic formula. I will insert this video into its problem we solve. If you have seen this section already, you can skip this video to the portion where we start solving the problem given. Let us proceed with these notes and tips in solving quadratic equations, specifically using only the quadratic formula. The quadratic formula seen here is applicable to all quadratic equations there. And those equations must be, of course, algebraic polynomial equations, because the quadratic formula cannot be applied to other types of equations, such as the transcendental equations, those involving trigonometric functions, exponential functions. In this case, we focus on the polynomial ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. That's the standard form. And we have the quadratic formula. This quadratic formula will give us values of x, and this quadratic formula is general. It will solve every algebraic polynomial equation. Every. It's applicable to all, as long as it's algebraic polynomial. In fact, we don't need to know all the other techniques of solving a quadratic equation, although we still have to learn those techniques, because in math, the more techniques you learn, the better. And there are also cases where that technique that we learn can be applied in other branches of math and science. Now, here is the quadratic formula. That's negative b plus minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay, now have you memorized this formula yet? Now, this is like the Pythagorean theorem. This is very basic in algebra, and let me share with you a technique in how to memorize this. When I was young, I would memorize this on a short-term basis, put it in my head, and then I would write this down on a piece of paper 50 times in succession. 50 times on a piece of paper, a large piece of paper, of course. I write the formula down from my short-term memory. And the next day, you'll be surprised. After writing it for 50 times, you would still remember the quadratic formula. That's what I do also for important formulas where I keep on forgetting them. Sometimes, there are formulas you just simply can't memorize them. So what I do is I write them down 50 times. Alright, so let's proceed with some tips and techniques. To solve for x using the quadratic formula, this is our attack strategy, this is our solutions strategy. I'm going to highlight it. You must use, I've shared with you here on the left side of the page, our objective, our attack strategy. Our objective is first to manipulate the given problem, the given equation, so that it will be of the standard quadratic form ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. A is the coefficient of the term x squared. B is the coefficient of the term x, and c is the constant. You must manipulate the equation so that it will be of the standard quadratic form ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. And then once you have achieved the standard quadratic form, you apply the quadratic formula. It's that simple. You can actually solve this in 5 minutes, because all you need to do is to plug in these coefficients into the quadratic formula. So I will share with you here also on the left the tips and the techniques that you should be aware of in solving quadratic equations using the quadratic formula. Again, there are many ways of solving the quadratic equation, but in this particular case, we have to use the quadratic formula. That is the nature of the problems we're given. First, let us go over the quadratic formula first, so that you will be familiar with its form. Here's the quadratic formula. X equals negative b plus minus the square root of the quantity b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. When we solve quadratic equations using the quadratic formula, you must realize that there are exactly two roots or two solutions or two values of x that will make the quadratic equation correct. There are two. Exactly two. Not 3, not 4, not 1, but exactly 2. This is due to the fundamental theorem of algebra, where if you have an algebraic polynomial equation of degree n, in this case the n equals 2, then you'll have exactly n roots. In the case of the quadratic equation, algebraic quadratic equation, you'll have exactly two roots, because the degree of this equation is 2. So you will have exactly 2 roots. And in the quadratic formula, this is shown by the plus and the minus sign here. That means the first solution, the first x solution, the first roots will be when we evaluate this formula using first the plus sign, and it will give you one of the roots, one of the two roots, one of the two solutions. Now, if we perform the minus sign, the subtraction sign here, then that will give us the second root. So there will be 2 roots. We're not going to add and subtract simultaneously. It has to be done successively. There's no such thing as add and subtract simultaneously here in this formula. So we'll have exactly 2 roots. Right, so let's proceed. Now, look at the term here, negative b. Be careful because it's a negative b. So if b happens to be negative, then that will be negative of a negative, which becomes a positive. So be careful about the negative there. Now, another thing that you should note is the expression under the square root. And that expression is b squared minus 4ac here. B squared minus 4ac is an expression that is called the discriminant. It's very important because the value of this entire expression, should be positive. Should be positive because if it is negative, the value of this, if it's negative, then you will have the square root of a negative number, which is, involved in advanced algebra, because that will lead into the concept of imaginary numbers or complex numbers. So at this stage of your studies, if your discriminant, the quantity b squared minus 4ac, is negative, then try to check your multiplications there and your subtraction, because most likely you committed a mistake there in the calculation of b squared minus 4ac. So to summarize, the moment you have a negative quantity for b squared minus 4ac, which is called the discriminant, which is the expression inside the square root, then if it's negative, then you probably made a mistake at this stage of your study of algebra. Well, it happens that there will be a square root of a negative number, but that is far advanced. So that's your hint that you made a mistake there if you get a square root of a negative number. Okay, once you have the standard quadratic form, then by the process of identification, you will know the value for a, and you will substitute it into the formula, and then you will know the value of b, you substitute it into the formula, and remember there's a square here, there's an exponent, and then you substitute the value of c into the formula here in the discriminants. So that's by the process of specific identification. And let's go to the tips here on the left. Now on the left are tips. Number 1, there are exactly 2 roots. Exactly 2 roots, but it could be repeated though. We call that multiplicity. It could be the first and the second roots would be the same value. Let's say, for example, 4 and 4. The first root is 4, the second root is 4. It's possible. But there are 2 roots. Number 2, for the tips, watch out for the positive and negative signs. Especially here, for example, in the negative b. example for here in the discriminant, that's a minus there, that's a subtraction. And then sometimes your A and your C, or your C could be negative, so you will be multiplying here positive and negative numbers, or negative and positive numbers, or negative and negative numbers. So watch out for the positive negative signs. Yes. Number 2. Number 3, use as many parentheses as possible when substituting values into A, B, and C. For example, if A equals 2, B equals 3, C equals negative 5, make sure you use parentheses when you substitute the values. What is the purpose of that? The purpose of that is to avoid any confusion. Parentheses, parentheses, you put a parenthesis here, parenthesis there, parenthesis there. Okay, try to make sure that you have a parenthesis here, parenthesis here, parenthesis here, parenthesis here, parenthesis here, so that you will not be confused. That's tip number 3. Now tip number 4. Tip number 4, the value of the discriminant, which is the b squared minus 4ac, ought to be positive. Otherwise, it will result into a square root of a negative number, which is far advanced. So for our intents and purposes here, we should get a positive number. Tip number 5, don't forget the exponents, especially here in the discriminant. You have b squared and there's exponent there too. We all make mistakes with that exponent. We forget, especially if b, for example, is a fraction, like let's say 3/2, and you take the square. Make sure that you properly evaluate the exponents for both the numerator and the denominator. Sometimes you just remember to square the numerator but not the denominator. Okay, so don't forget about that. And the 6th tip that we have is that subtracting a negative number is equivalent to adding a positive number. For example, this is very important because this happens many times when we try to manipulate the equation so that it will be of the standard quadratic form. We'll be doing a lot of this. Subtracting a negative number, let's say 8, that is the same as adding a positive number. Subtracting a negative number is the same as adding a positive number. Or subtracting a positive number is equal to adding a negative number. So negative of negative is positive, or negative of positive, or positive of negative. No, they are equivalent, they are equal. So don't forget this, because we will be using this technique. Okay, we'll be using that technique almost in every problem. Alright, so those are the basic tips that I could share with you. And again, I'm going to insert this video into each problem that we solve involving the quadratic formula. Now let's proceed to solving the given problem. Let's proceed. So let us analyze the structure of this equation as given. Well, all of the variables and constants are already on the left hand side of the equation, left hand side, while on the right hand side is 0. So in the standard form, on the right hand side it's 0, right hand side of the equation. On the left hand side are all the variables and the constants here. So practically this is already of the standard form, except for the fact that this is a minus positive 8, and in the formula, as you can see here, we need a plus constant. So let's just do some minor transformation there, changing from subtraction to addition. Right, as you can see, this one is a subtraction. Now, a subtraction, when you perform the subtraction, it's actually the same as, okay, adding a negative number. Okay, adding a negative number. A minus positive 8 is actually equal to plus negative 8. Right? So we can transform with that one. Very easy. Just to remind you of what you have already discussed before. So the equation now becomes x squared plus 2x plus negative 8 equals 0. Be generous with using parentheses. The more parentheses, the better, to avoid confusion. So now this equation of the form a squared plus bx plus c equal to 0. Let's write the form there. Ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So by direct identification, we can see that this is a here. Let's put it on the left hand side. A equals 1, and this is b. B equals 2, and then how can we not write? And then c equals negative 8. C equals negative 8. They're here for easy reference. So we have identified a, b, and c. This is already the standard form. Ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. Bang! Let's apply the quadratic formula. Okay, let's put the quadratic formula here. X equals negative b plus minus square root of b. Right, so using the formula here on the left, solve for x. X equals negative b. What is b? 2. Don't forget that negative there. Plus minus the square root of b squared. What is b squared there? That's 2. B, 2. 2 squared. Again, use the parenthesis to minimize confusion. Minus 4 times a. What is a? 1. And what is c? Negative 8. See the importance of the parenthesis? The parenthesis will isolate the numbers so that you will not be confused. Now let's simplify. Sorry, still have to divide this by 2a. A is 1. Okay, let's simplify the discriminant. Look at the discriminant. The b squared minus 4ac here. This is simply 2 squared, that is 4. And this one is 4 times 8. That's 32. But since they have different size, the product is negative. Two numbers, different size, the product is negative. So 32. Now remember, there's a minus there. Right? So do not be confused. And this will just be reduced to simply 2. Let's do times 1. Alright, so let's simplify further. So x equals negative 2 plus minus the square root of 4 minus negative 32. Don't forget that negative 32 there, over 2. Simplifying, this will be negative 2 plus, let's do it on the next page. Alright, just to remind you, this is minus negative 32 is the same as plus positive 32, and 32 plus 4, that's actually 36. Alright, so let's simplify that one. Right, so we're going to simplify the expression. So it's now x minus 2 negative 2 plus minus the square root of 36 over 2, that's equal to minus 2 plus minus 6 over 2. Simplifying, that's x over 2 there, minus 2 over 2 plus minus 6 over 3, 6 over 2, so that is minus 1 plus minus 3. So therefore x equals minus plus minus 3. And that's the solution there, which means the solution is, x equals negative 1 plus 3, which is equal to positive 2, and x equals negative 1 minus 3 equals negative 4. Let's simplify that one, so but we have already the solution. There are two solutions because this is a quadratic equation, and the quadratic equation actually is according to the fundamental theorem of algebra, the quadratic equation has two roots, and we're proving there's two roots. Let's simplify. So x equals minus 1 plus minus 3. So the first solution will be the plus. Minus 1 plus 3 equals negative 2. The next solution is minus 1 minus 3. Remember, the first is plus and the second is minus. Okay? And so it is equal to, it's equal to minus, this is plus, plus 2, this is minus 4. Okay. So these are the solutions. x1 equals positive 2, x1 equals minus 4. Okay. There are two roots. x1 equals positive 2, x2 equals negative 4. Two roots, okay? So what we're going to do is to do some check whether our solution is correct or not. Let's do some check. Alright, let's do some checking. Remember, we have two solutions. Put it here on the side. X, maybe on x1 it's positive 2, and x2 here is negative 4. Okay. Alright, so let's do some substitution into the original equation. So if we substitute, let's do first x equals 2. Okay, let's do this one first. X equals 2. So you'll have 2 squared plus 2 times 2 minus 8. Remember, this is a checking, huh? Way of checking. Is it equal to 0? So this is 4 plus 4 minus 8. Is it equal to 0? And 4 plus 4 is 8. 8 minus 8, is that equal to 0? 0 equals 0. Check. So we have now proven by substituting into the original equation that actually x plus 2 is a solution. Is it too detailed? We're very slow, but you know, if you're a weak student in math, you should be slow, and we're doing this for you. We have already done the check for the root for the solution x equals 2. So now we're going to do for x equals negative 4. So this will be negative 4. You substitute into the original equation. Negative 4 squared plus 2 times negative 4 minus 8, is that equal to 0? Remember, we're doing some check here for the solution or the roots. X equals negative 4. So negative 4 squared, that's 16. Why? Because a negative number raised to an even power is positive. And 16 minus, in this case, that's negative 8 minus 8, is that equal to 0? Simplifying, because this is minus 8 minus 8 is 16, so that's 16 minus 16, is that equal to 0? 0, yes, equals 0. We have now proven that x equals negative 4 is another solution to the quadratic equation. 2 roots, because the polynomial is of the degree 2. A quadratic equation is a polynomial of degree 2. Roots for the solution. This is the polynomial here, and this is the equation. Without the equation, it's just a polynomial. Now this is a polynomial equation of degree 2. So thank you. We have 2 roots. We have solved for each root, the plus and the minus, and we have substituted it into the original equation to prove whether the equation is correct. Equation is satisfied. Yes, they are satisfied for both. So x squared plus 2x minus 8 equals to 0 has 2 solutions. X equals 2 and x equals negative 4. Thank you, and see you in our next problem.